Hello, my name is Sanda Iliescu, and I'm a professor of architecture and art at the University of Virginia. The presentation I'll give is titled Angels, the Intertwining of the Sacred and the Secular. One day, 5 years ago, at a time of great personal difficulty, I picked up a pen and tried to make a drawing. Although most of the time drawing comes easily to me, this time I could not do it. I was too overwhelmed by grief and self-doubt. I recall sitting for what felt like hours, staring at a blank piece of paper, pen in hand. Then somehow I found the courage to begin drawing. My hand seemed to move by itself. Slowly, it traced the rough, awkward form of a human being crying. The image looked so sad it made me cry, but as I drew the tears, something opened inside me. Feeling the need to comfort the poor creature, I gave it wings. The human form became an angel. As I drew, the darkness inside me lifted. Everything around me came to life. Not only the paper, pen, and the lines I traced, but also the sounds of birds chirping outside, a patch of sunshine on the floor, the smell of cooking emanating from the kitchen. All these ordinary things suddenly seemed very special, even miraculous. As I continued to draw angels for the next few days, I tried to express my newfound wonder and joy at the everyday world around me, to give common objects and places I had ignored before a measure of grace and dignity. To do this, I often showed angels in quotidian attitudes, doing simple, ordinary activities. This angel, for instance, is carrying a tray with ointment jars and medicine bottles. This one has just discovered and is quietly examining a very small snail, which you see in the drawing's lower right. And this one is playing a musical instrument while looking ruefully and perhaps enviously at the little bird in the drawing's upper right corner. With a puzzled expression, this angel is carefully reviewing pages in a 3-ring binder. To this day, I continue to draw angels. I never show them flying or inhabiting celestial realms. They are always here on earth and doing things we humans do. For example, crying. There are what I might call secular angels. In his 2009 book, Encountering the Secular, philosopher J. Heath Ashley draws on sources as diverse as Ralph Waldo Emerson and Gilles Deleuze to explore the spiritual dimensions of secular life. All too often, Ashley argues, we think of the secular as only an antidote to the presumed irrationality and oppression of religion, or we lament the way the secular has robbed our lives of the meaning that religion once brought. For Ashley, however, the secular can be much more. It can have an immanent spiritual value. Ashley proposes that the realms of the secular and the sacred, which we tend to think of as opposites, are not as far from one another as we might think. The borders between them, he argues, are highly porous and ambiguous. He writes, the rigid separation between these two realms, the secular and the spiritual, gets in the way of experiencing an immanent value, a kind tied neither to transcendent reality, for instance, God or an ideal, nor to the satisfaction of the self, for instance, pleasure or knowledge. This spring, at the suggestion of one of the ACSF 13 reviewers of this paper, I read Eckhart Tolle's 1997 book, The Power of Noun. Although a very different kind of writer than Ashley, Tolle, who is a spiritual teacher, also has a vision of a much more porous kind of relationship between the secular and the sacred. In his book, he describes a powerful spiritual experience. In 1977, at the age of 29, Toll awoke in the middle of the night in a state of great depression and anxiety. Significantly, he describes his ordeal in terms of ordinary, quotidian things. He writes, "The silence of the night, the vague outlines of the furniture in the dark room, the distant noise of a passing train, everything felt so alien, so hostile, and so meaningless that it created in me a deep loathing of the world." Toll was seized as well with a deep loathing of himself. He felt he could not live with himself any longer. But the moment he thought about this, he realized this expression implied a splitting of the self into two parts, the I and the himself with whom the I cannot live. This was wrong, he felt, and this realization led to a transcendent experience. His depression and anxiety vanished. In their place, Toll experienced a terrifying void. He writes, "I was gripped by an intense fear and my body started to shake. I heard the words, 'Resist nothing,' as if spoken inside my chest. I could feel myself being sucked into a void." Upon awakening the next morning, Toll's world was utterly transformed. He writes, "Everything was fresh and pristine, as if it had just come into existence. I picked up things, a pencil, an empty bottle, marveling at the aliveness and beauty of it all." Now, there are three parts to Toll's spiritual experience: a first state of depression, anxiety, and self-loathing; a second middle transcendent state, that mysterious void that may be interpreted as a contact with some God or force beyond this world, hence transcendent; and finally, a third state of joy, wonder, and love for the simple things of this world. I have never had a transcendent experience of the kind Toll describes as a terrifying void. But I am familiar with his first and third transitional states, with a fear and despair, and with a joy and wonder he describes, as well as with a surprisingly important role that common, ordinary objects and places can play at such times in our lives. I have come to think that these states of mind, as if not transcendent, then as transitional states, ones that possess a deep spirituality that is difficult to account for in rational or psychological ways. Like Toll, I experienced a long period of self-doubt and deep sadness before I drew my first angel. My awareness of special, important things in my life, the people I loved, the books I took pleasure in, completely vanished. All I had left were the prosaic things in the world around me: the kitchen sink, the bedroom dresser, the night lamp. These ordinary things seemed not only dull, but alien, hostile, and ugly. Also, like Toll, during my later period of joy and wonder, I became acutely aware of these same prosaic things. This time, however, they were transformed. They became, as Toll puts it, alive, fresh, and beautiful. Because in many cultures, angels are considered intermediaries, connecting us with the divine realm, I like to interpret the first and third stages of Toll's, as well as my own experiences, as angelic manifestations, as moments when we are touched or visited by angels. A short while after I drew my first angel, I read a story by American fiction writer Donald Barthelme, titled On Angels, and published in this collection of 60 stories. In it, Barthelme speculates on what might happen to angels in a world that has lost its belief in a divine being or beings. The story opens with this provocative passage. The death of God left the angels in a strange position. They were overtaken suddenly by a fundamental question. One can attempt to imagine the moment. How did they look at the instant the question invaded them, flooding the angelic consciousness, taking hold with terrifying force? The question was, what are angels? While reading Toll's book, I asked myself an analogous question. What happens when there is no contact with the divine, no transcendent and terrifying void that sucks us in? What happens to the other two states, which I have called angelic manifestations? The first state of sorrow and profound spiritual depletion, and the latter experience of profound joy and love. Without the existence of a divine realm, these other states would of course change. They would become, I believe, passages to something that is only imagined or promised, not fulfilled. Donald Barthelme's angels also change. Without God, they gain very human qualities. They suffer doubts, fall into despair, and experience terror. They cry and lament. They experience curiosity and states of adoration. They shout and holler. They philosophize inconclusively on the nature of chaos. Now, ultimately, Barthelme's angels consider refusing to be. Towards the end of the story, they wish to die. Barthelme writes, the most serious, because the most radical proposal considered by the angels was refusal. They would remove themselves from being, not be. Barthelme's story has a dark humor, but it is also very melancholy. It begins with the death of God and ends with the death of the angels. After reading it, I asked myself, what would happen to human beings if we had not only no divinity, but also no spiritual experiences, no angels about us? How would we relate to the ordinary, everyday world around us? What would we become? I believe that without wonder and joy, and without two states of despair and profound sadness, our relationships to ordinary objects would become purely practical. We would use them to achieve our goals. Or materialistic, we would value them as possessions and as instruments of power. Or careless, we would not value them at all. Titled A Cloudburst of Material Possessions, this drawing by Leonardo da Vinci captures one terrifying vision of such a world devoured by materialism and devoid of wonder. A deluge of objects, cardinals' hats, baskets, rakes, a painter's palette, calipers, jewelry, hammers, all fall from the sky and slash the air. It is hard to imagine being in this place, for there is no emptiness, no space that we might safely occupy ourselves, no space to form connections. In such a place, objects would lose their distinctiveness and immanent value. We ourselves would lose our curiosity and openness to unforeseen possibilities. Perhaps we might also lose our capacity to empathize and even love. In contrast with Leonardo's deluge of material possessions, I will end with a bit of emptiness. I will show a few more angels, which I've drawn in the last couple of years, this time without any words. Thank you so much for watching this presentation. Bye-bye.